The rain poured heavily that night, drenching the bustling city of Jakarta. The neon lights reflected off the wet pavement, creating a kaleidoscope of colors. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and the faint aroma of street food wafting from nearby stalls. In the midst of this chaotic yet vibrant scene, a sleek black car pulled up in front of a modest orphanage. The driver, a middle-aged man with a stern expression, stepped out and opened the umbrella for his passenger. From the car emerged a man in his late 40s, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit. His name was Alexander Hartono, a renowned CEO known for his ruthless business tactics and cold demeanor. He had built an empire from scratch, but his success came at the cost of his humanity. Tonight, however, he was not here for business. He was here to fulfill a promise he had made to his late sister, who had always been involved in charity work. As he entered the orphanage, the sound of children's laughter and chatter filled the air. The walls were adorned with colorful drawings, and the scent of crayons and paper filled his nostrils. He was greeted by the headmistress, a kind-looking woman in her 60s named Ibu Sari. "Mr. Hartono, thank you for coming," she said with a warm smile. "The children have been looking forward to meeting you." Alexander nodded curtly, his eyes scanning the room. His gaze fell upon a young girl sitting alone in the corner, her eyes downcast. She looked to be about 16, with long black hair and a fragile frame. There was something about her that caught his attention, something that made him feel a pang of guilt he couldn't quite explain. "Who is that girl?" he asked, pointing in her direction. Ibu Sari's smile faltered for a moment before she replied, "That's Rara. She's been with us for a few years now. She's a quiet one, but she's very bright." Alexander approached the girl, his footsteps echoing in the now silent room. He crouched down to her level and asked, "What's your name?" The girl looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. "Rara," she stammered. "Rara," Alexander repeated, his voice softer than usual. "Why are you sitting here all alone?" Rara hesitated before answering. I don't like crowds." Alexander studied her for a moment before standing up. "Come with me," he said, extending his hand. Rara looked at his hand, then at his face, before tentatively taking it. He led her to a quieter room, where they could talk without the noise of the other children. As they sat down, Alexander asked, "Do you know who I am?" Rara nodded. "You're Mr. Hartono, the CEO." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "And what do you know about CEOs?" Rara shrugged. "They're powerful. They make a lot of money. But they're also lonely." Alexander was taken aback by her insight. "Why do you say that?" Rara looked down at her hands. "Because my father was a CEO. He was always busy, always working. He never had time for me. And then he left." Alexander felt a lump form in his throat. He had never been one to show emotion, but something about this girl's words struck a chord within him. He cleared his throat and said, "Well, I'm not like your father. I may be busy, but I always keep my promises." Rara looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and skepticism. "What kind of promises?" Alexander hesitated for a moment before answering. "The kind that change lives." The days that followed Alexander's visit to the orphanage were filled with a sense of unease. He couldn't shake the image of Rara's fragile frame and the haunting look in her eyes. It was as if she had seen too much for someone so young. And yet, there was a resilience in her that intrigued him. One evening, as he sat in his penthouse overlooking the city, he found himself staring at the photo of his late sister. She had always been the compassionate one, the one who believed in second chances and the power of kindness. Alexander, on the other hand, had always been more pragmatic, more focused on success and power. But now, for the first time in years, he felt a stirring of something he thought he had buried long ago: empathy. The next morning, he called his assistant and instructed her to arrange a meeting with Ibu Sari. He had made a promise to his sister to continue her charity work, and he intended to keep it. But more than that, he wanted to do something for Rara, something that would give her a chance at a better life. When he arrived at the orphanage, Ibu Sari was waiting for him with a warm smile. "Mr. Hartono, it's good to see you again." Alexander nodded. "Ibu Sari, I've been thinking about Rara. I want to help her. I want to give her a chance to have a better future." Ibu Sari's eyes widened in surprise. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Hartono. But Rara, she's a special case. She's been through a lot, and she's very guarded." It won't be easy to gain her trust. Alexander's expression hardened. I don't expect it to be easy, but I'm not one to back down from a challenge. Ibusari studied him for a moment before nodding. Very well. I'll arrange for you to spend some time with her. But please, be patient with her. She's been hurt before, and it will take time for her to open up. Alexander agreed, and over the next few weeks, he made it a point to visit the orphanage regularly. At first, Rara was hesitant, keeping her distance and speaking only when necessary. But slowly, as Alexander continued to show up, she began to open up. One afternoon, as they sat in the garden, Rara asked, "Why are you doing this? Why do you care about me?" Alexander looked at her, his expression softening. Because I made a promise. And because I see something in you. Something special. Rara frowned. What do you see? Alexander hesitated before answering. I see someone who has been through a lot, but who still has the strength to keep going. I see someone who deserves a chance to have a better life. Rara's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away. I don't know if I can trust you. Alexander nodded. I understand. Trust is something that has to be earned, and I'm willing to earn it. As the weeks turned into months, Alexander and Rara formed an unlikely bond. He became a mentor to her, teaching her about business, finance, and the world outside the orphanage. And in return, Rara taught him about compassion, empathy, and the importance of human connection. It was a crisp autumn morning when Alexander received the call that would change everything. He was in the middle of a board meeting when his phone buzzed insistently. Glancing at the caller ID, he saw that it was Ibusari. Excusing himself from the meeting, he stepped out into the hallway to take the call. Mr. Hartono, you need to come to the orphanage right away. Ibusari's voice was urgent, filled with a sense of panic that Alexander had never heard before. What's wrong? He asked, his heart racing. It's Rara. She's pregnant. Ibusari stammered. Alexander felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under him. What? How? Who? I don't know all the details, but she's in a state of shock. She needs you. Ibusari replied. Without another word, Alexander ended the call and rushed to the orphanage. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, confusion, and a deep sense of guilt. How could this have happened? He had promised to protect her, to give her a better life, and now this. When he arrived at the orphanage, he found Rara sitting on a bench in the garden, her arms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold herself together. Her face was pale, and her eyes were red from crying. Alexander approached her slowly, his heart breaking at the sight of her. Rara, he said softly, sitting down beside her. Rara looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry, she whispered. Alexander shook his head. You have nothing to be sorry for. This is not your fault. But I need to know, who did this to you? Rara hesitated before answering. It was one of the older boys from the orphanage. He took advantage of me. Alexander felt a surge of anger, but he forced himself to stay calm. We'll deal with this, Rara. I promise you, we'll get through this together. Rara looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. What are we going to do? Alexander took a deep breath before answering. First, we'll make sure you're safe. Then, we'll figure out the next steps. But no matter what, I'll be here for you. As they sat there in the garden, Alexander made a silent vow to himself. He would do whatever it took to protect Rara, to give her and her unborn child a chance at a better life. And in doing so, he would finally fulfill the promise he had made to his sister and perhaps find redemption for himself. The days that followed were a blur of activity. Alexander arranged for Rara to move into his penthouse, where she would be safe and well taken care of. He hired a team of doctors and counselors to ensure that she received the best possible care, both physically and emotionally. At first, Rara was hesitant, unsure of how to navigate this new life. But Alexander was patient, taking the time to explain everything to her and reassuring her that she was not alone. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Rara asked, "Why are you doing all this for me? I'm just an orphan. I don't deserve all this." Alexander looked at her, his expression serious. Rara, you are not just anything. You are a strong, intelligent, and capable young woman. And you deserve every bit of this and more. Rara's eyes filled with tears, but this time, they were tears of gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. Alexander nodded. You don't have to thank me. This is what family does. And from now on, we're family. As the weeks went by, Rara began to settle into her new life. She started attending a private school where she excelled in her studies. She also began to take an interest in Alexander's business, often asking him questions and offering her own insights. One day, as they were going over some financial reports, Rara said, "You know, I think there's a lot of potential in the tech industry. If we invest in the right startups, we could really make a difference." Alexander raised an eyebrow, impressed by her insight. "You might be onto something. Why don't you do some research and present me with a proposal?" Rara's eyes lit up with excitement. "Really? You'd let me do that?" Alexander smiled. "Of course. I believe in you, Rara, and I want you to believe in yourself too." As Rara delved into her research, Alexander couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She was growing into a confident and capable young woman, and he knew that she had a bright future ahead of her. But as they prepared for the arrival of the baby, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to be done. He knew that he had to confront the boy who had hurt Rara and ensure that he would never be able to harm anyone else. The day of the confrontation arrived, and Alexander found himself standing outside the orphanage once again. This time, however, his purpose was different. He was here to seek justice for Rara and to ensure that the boy who had hurt her would face the consequences of his actions. As he entered the orphanage, he was greeted by Ibusari, who looked nervous. "Mr. Hartono, are you sure about this?" "The boy, he's just a child himself." Alexander's expression hardened. "He may be a child, but his actions have consequences, and he needs to understand that." Ibusari nodded reluctantly and led him to the boy's room. When they entered, they found the boy sitting on his bed, his head hung low. He looked up as they entered, his eyes filled with fear. Alexander approached him, his voice cold and stern. "Do you know why I'm here?" The boy nodded, his voice trembling. I didn't mean to hurt her. I didn't know. I didn't know what I was doing." Alexander's anger flared, but he forced himself to stay calm. "You may not have known what you were doing, but that doesn't excuse your actions. You hurt someone, and now you have to face the consequences." The boy's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Alexander took a deep breath before continuing. "I'm not here to punish you. I'm here to make sure that you understand the gravity of what you've done, and to ensure that you never do anything like this again." The boy nodded, his tears falling freely. "I won't. I promise." Alexander studied him for a moment before nodding. "Good. Because if you do, there will be no second chances." As he left the orphanage, Alexander felt a sense of closure. He had done what he needed to do to protect Rara and to ensure that the boy would never harm anyone else. But he also knew that this was just the beginning. There was still much to be done, and many challenges ahead. The day of the baby's arrival was both joyous and nerve-wracking. Alexander had arranged for Rara to give birth at one of the best hospitals in the city, with a team of top-notch doctors and nurses on standby. As Rara was wheeled into the delivery room, Alexander waited outside, pacing back and forth. He had never felt so anxious in his life. He had faced countless challenges in his career, but nothing compared to this. Hours passed, and finally, the doctor emerged with a smile on his face. "Congratulations, Mr. Hartono. You have a healthy baby girl." Alexander felt a surge of relief and joy. "And Rara? How is she?" The doctor nodded. "She's doing well. She's exhausted, but she's fine." Alexander thanked the doctor and rushed into the room to see Rara. She was lying in bed, holding the baby in her arms. Her face was pale, but there was a look of pure love and joy in her eyes. Alexander approached her slowly, his heart swelling with emotion. "Rara," he said softly, "she's beautiful." Rara looked up at him, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Alexander, for everything." Alexander shook his head. "You don't have to thank me. This is what family does." As they sat there, looking at the baby, Alexander felt a sense of fulfillment that he had never experienced before. He had started this journey out of a sense of duty, but now he realized that it had become so much more. He had found a new purpose, a new reason to live. The days that followed the baby's arrival were filled with joy and new challenges. Alexander found himself taking on the role of a father, something he had never imagined he would do. He spent hours holding the baby, feeding her, and singing her to sleep. It was a side of him that he had never shown to anyone, and it brought him a sense of peace and contentment. Rara, too, was thriving in her new role as a mother. She was determined to give her daughter the best possible life, and she worked hard to balance her studies with her responsibilities as a parent. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Rara said, "Alexander, I've been thinking. I want to go to college. I want to study business, like you." Alexander smiled. "That's a great idea, Rara. I'll support you in any way I can." Rara's eyes lit up with excitement. "Thank you. I know it won't be easy, but I want to make a better future for my daughter." Alexander nodded. "And you will. I have no doubt about that." As they continued to talk, Alexander couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Rara had come so far, and she was determined to keep moving forward. He knew that she had a bright future ahead of her, and he was grateful to be a part of it. As the years passed, Rara continued to excel in her studies and in her role as a mother. She graduated from college with top honors and went on to work in Alexander's company, where she quickly rose through the ranks. Alexander, too, had changed. He had become more compassionate, more understanding, and more willing to give others a second chance. He had found a new sense of purpose, and it had transformed him in ways he had never imagined. One day, as they sat in his office, Rara said, "Alexander, I want to start my own company. I want to create something that will make a difference in the world." Alexander smiled. "I think that's a great idea, Rara, and I'll be here to support you every step of the way." Rara's eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you for everything. You've given me so much, and I don't know how I can ever repay you." Alexander shook his head. "You don't have to repay me, Rara. Seeing you succeed, seeing you happy, that's all the repayment I need." Rara's company quickly became a success, and she was soon recognized as one of the most influential young entrepreneurs in the country. She used her platform to advocate for women's rights and to support other young women who were trying to make a difference in the world. Alexander, too, continued to thrive. He had found a new sense of purpose, and it had transformed him in ways he had never imagined. He had become a mentor to many young entrepreneurs, and he was determined to use his wealth and influence to make a positive impact on the world. One evening, as they sat in the garden of Alexander's estate, Rara said, "Alexander, I want to thank you for everything. You've given me so much, and I don't know how I can ever repay you." Alexander smiled. "You don't have to repay me, Rara. Seeing you succeed, seeing you happy, that's all the repayment I need." Rara's eyes filled with tears. "I love you, Alexander. You're the father I never had." Alexander felt a lump form in his throat. "I love you too, Rara, and I'm so proud of the woman you've become." As the years passed, Alexander and Rara continued to build their legacy together. They had become a powerful team, using their wealth and influence to make a positive impact on the world. But as Alexander grew older, he began to think about the future. He knew that he wouldn't be around forever, and he wanted to ensure that Rara and her daughter would be taken care of. One evening, as they sat in the garden, Alexander said, "Rara, I've been thinking. I want to make you the CEO of my company. I want you to take over and continue the legacy that we've built together." Rara's eyes widened in surprise. "Alexander, I don't know what to say. That's a huge responsibility." Alexander nodded. "I know, but I believe in you, Rara. You've proven time and time again that you're capable of anything, and I know that you'll do an amazing job." Rara's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Alexander. I won't let you down." Alexander smiled. "I know you won't." As they sat there, looking out at the stars, Alexander felt a sense of peace and contentment that he had never experienced before. He had started this journey out of a sense of duty, but now he realized that it had become so much more. He had found a new purpose, a new reason to live, and as he looked at Rara, he knew that his legacy would live on through her. She was the daughter he never had, and he was so proud of the woman she had become. As the night grew darker, Alexander felt a sense of fulfillment that he had never experienced before. He had started this journey out of a sense of duty, but now he realized that it had become so much more. He had found a new purpose, a new reason to live, and as he looked at Rara, he knew that his legacy would live on through her. She was the daughter he never had, and he was so proud of the woman she had become. As the stars twinkled above, Alexander felt a sense of peace and contentment that he had never experienced before. He had started this journey out of a sense of duty, but now he realized that it had become so much more. He had found a new purpose, a new reason to live, and as he looked at Rara, he knew that his legacy would live on through her. She was the daughter he never had, and he was so proud of the woman she had become. As the night grew darker, Alexander felt a sense of fulfillment that he had never experienced before. He had started this journey out of a sense of duty, but now he realized that it had become so much more. He had found a new purpose, a new reason to live, and as he looked at Rara, he knew that his legacy would live on through her. She was the daughter he never had, and he was so proud of the woman she had become. As the stars twinkled above, Alexander felt a sense of peace and contentment that he had never experienced before. He had started this journey out of a sense of duty, but now he realized that it had become so much more. He had found a new purpose, a new reason to live, and as he looked at Rara, he knew that his legacy would live on through her. She was the daughter he never had, and he was so proud of the woman she had become. As the night grew darker, Alexander felt a sense of fulfillment that he had never experienced before. He had started this journey out of a sense of duty, but now he realized that it had become so much more. He had found a new purpose, a new reason to live, and as he looked at Rara, he knew that his legacy would live on through her. She was the daughter he never had, and he was so proud of the woman she had become. As the stars twinkled above, Alexander felt a sense of peace and contentment that he had never experienced before. He had started this journey out of a sense of duty, but now he realized that it had become so much more. He had found a new purpose, a new reason to live, and as he looked at Rara, he knew that his legacy would live on through her. She was the daughter he never had, and he was so proud of the woman she had become. As the night grew darker, Alexander felt a sense of fulfillment that he had never experienced before. He had started this journey out of a sense of duty, but now he realized that it had become so much more. He had found a new purpose, a new reason to live, and as he looked at Rara, he knew that his legacy would live on through her. She was the daughter he never had, and he was so proud of the woman she had become. As the stars twinkled above, Alexander felt a sense of peace and contentment that he had never experienced before. He had started this journey out of a sense of duty, but now he realized that it had become so much more. He had found a new purpose, a new reason to live, and as he looked at Rara, he knew that his legacy would live on through her. She was the daughter he never had, and he was so proud of the woman she had become. As the night grew darker, Alexander felt a sense of fulfillment that he had never experienced before. He had started this journey out of a sense of duty, but now he realized that it had become so much more. He had found a new purpose, a new reason to live, and as he looked at Rara, he knew that his legacy would live on through her. She was the daughter he never had, and he was so proud of the woman she had become. As the stars twinkled above, Alexander felt a sense of peace and contentment that he had never experienced before. He had started this journey out of a sense of duty, but now he realized that it had become so much more. He had found a new purpose, a new reason to live,